It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out, and tonight's guest is Linda Alle-Murphy. She's a business litigation attorney, and as we always say, our content is driven by our clients. And we recognize that a lot of our clients are, when they are getting a divorce, they're not just dealing, I see you, Linda, they are not just a business, which makes it even harder, especially when you're dealing with a high conflict. So, hi, Linda.
Hello.
I thought it would be wonderful to have a business attorney get involved in a conversation about this because many of our clients, as I told Linda, a lot of our clients are professionals, they're very savvy, and they're business owners and entrepreneurs, and it's really tricky when they're trying to still keep what's due to them but get away from this toxic ex. So, Linda, thank you for coming on, and you want to just introduce yourself, you know, where you're from and what you do, and then I have a ton of questions to ask you. And thanks again for coming.
Okay, so I'll try to make it short so we can get to the questions. But my name is Linda Alle-Murphy. I'm litigation counsel for a law firm in the Philadelphia area called Company Counsel, LLC. And this is my second career. I had a first career as a classically trained cellist. So now I am working exclusively with brain-oriented things, but I still play cello. And I'm glad to share some knowledge because these partnership disputes can get very tricky and very complicated.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about in the beginning, well, actually, no, before we get to the main stuff, your career as a cello player, I love to ask people what makes them very good at what they do. And you referenced as to how your background in playing the cello has impacted your career as a litigation attorney. So tell us why being a cellist makes you really good at your job.
Well, I think that talking to a judge is somewhat like playing a concert, to make a direct comparison. You are presenting, not really performing in the sense of playing music, but you are presenting a case and advocating for a client. So I think those parts of the skills carry over between music and the law as a litigation attorney.
Okay, and I know you also said that part of playing the cello involves intense focus, and you do the opposite of multitasking.
Yes, that is also true. When you are practicing or playing, you shut other sounds out. And so I think that skill carries over to litigation as well. When you're at a deposition, for example, you have to be laser focused on the questions that you're going to ask and what your next question is going to be, and not be distracted by whatever else is going in the room, such as an overly aggressive opposing counsel. You can't let that distract you.
And that's something that everybody watching now and later probably has a lot of experience dealing with, and can definitely be very distracting and scary.
Yes.
All right. So one of the things that we talked about is how I know for our people, when you get a divorce, you think you just need to get a divorce attorney. But like I said, a number of our clients own businesses with their spouses or partners. And so you talked about the importance of getting a business attorney involved other than just a divorce attorney. And why is that?
Yes. Glad to share that with our viewers and listeners. Most of the business disputes are not handled in family court. They are handled in state court, whatever your state court is called. In Pennsylvania, it's Common Pleas Court. In New Jersey, it's Superior Court. In New York, it's Supreme Court. you will not be resolving your business dispute most likely in family court, but in state court in front of a judge who hears all different kinds of cases.
So why would a business attorney be more, why couldn't just a regular divorce attorney handle that?
Well, I think a good attorney can do just about anything, but a business attorney has more experience, for example, in the types of claims that you could bring as perhaps a minority shareholder in your business, or if you have certain contractual obligations under your partnership agreement or LLC or LLP agreement or your incorporation papers. It is helpful to have someone with specifically business experience who can help you achieve the best result in the breakup of your partnership or corporation or S corporation.
Yeah, so it's almost like a specialist in this particular area because often it involves a lot of money and assets that are completely separate from the marriage itself.
That's right. That's right. You will have a separate business account, obviously, separate bookkeeping, perhaps other employees involved, depending on the size of your business. So yes, there are additional issues besides just marital property or divorce-related problems.
Okay, so speaking of that, one of the things we talked about was at the very beginning of a business relationship, there's things that you should be considering setting up. Just like when people get married, they talk about a prenup. What kinds of things should people be thinking about when they're setting up a business with their partner? I know sometimes it's a little too late for some of the listeners here, but for those of you at the beginning of the process, like me, I'm a little bit in, but what should we think about to protect ourselves just in case?
Right. In a sense, it is like a prenup agreement because you always start with high hopes and anticipations, and the assumption is that the partners are on the same page with what they want out of the business and how they want to conduct that business. But you should definitely get a written agreement in place, an operating agreement as to how you want your business to be run and what you would do. For example, if one of the partners becomes incapacitated or passes away, what would happen? How a dissolution would take place, what your dissolution provisions are for your business entity, whether you want to set it up as an S corp or an LLC, or you want to incorporate. There are advantages and disadvantages to each form. Those are a couple of things that come to mind that should be considered when you're starting your business.
Okay, and is that something that we would call contingency planning, or is that something else?
I've never heard of the term contingency planning used in connection with an operating agreement, but that is the effect. You are planning for all possible contingencies of what could happen down the road with your business or your LLC or whatever. So yes, you are planning for contingencies.
Okay. All right. And then also when people are divorcing, attorneys look at the partnership agreement. So for you as a business litigation attorney, what kinds of things do you look for when you're going through someone's agreement?
Oh, well, that's a great question. For one thing, I look and see whether my client is a minority shareholder or whether it's a 50-50 partnership or whether my client is a majority shareholder, because depending on that status, you would file different types of causes of action if there is resistance to breaking up the business entity. I would also, of course, check the website of the Secretary of State or whatever the licensing agency is in your state to see what the status is, whether the paperwork has been kept up with the renewals and the registering with the Secretary of State or whoever your licensing agent is in your state. And yeah, those are a couple of things that I would look at.
Okay, so you're talking about minority shareholder and majority shareholder, and what if someone is a minority shareholder so they don't have as much power in the business relationship? How can they deal with that? Because I know just like in these difficult relationships, the person with less power ends up suffering significantly.
Yes. Now, here's why I recommend a business litigation attorney. As a minority shareholder, you can still enforce your rights against the corporation or the LLC in what's called a derivative suit. You sue not only on your own behalf, but on behalf of the corporation. So you are essentially protecting the interests of the business entity against the majority shareholder, alleging mismanagement of funds or whatever the case might be, or fraud, or whatever the wrongdoing is on the part of the majority shareholder. You can file what's called a derivative action as a minority shareholder, both in your own name and the name of the business entity.
Okay, and then you also had mentioned that in the end game there's some official certificate of dissolution. What is that? It makes me think of like two divorces going on at the same time.
Yes, they are. They're a business divorce and a personal divorce. You again have to go to the Secretary of State and file a certificate of dissolution. And this is where it gets difficult. If your partner is being is resisting the breakup of the business entity, they are not going to agree to the filing of the certificate of dissolution with the Secretary of State. Again, the nomenclature might be a little bit different from state to state, but essentially it's paperwork filed with the state certifying that the business entity is now dissolved. And if you have a spouse who is, or a soon-to-be ex-spouse who is resisting dissolving the corporation, you might have to go to court to force that to happen.
So it makes me think of almost forcing someone to go to court with a trial date if they can't work it out in mediation with dissolving the marriage. It's a similar thing with getting a trial date for a business dissolution.
Yes, exactly. Procedurally, the litigation will probably look different than in family court. I am not a divorce attorney or a family law attorney, but you will file a complaint. The other side will have to file an answer or objections. You'll go through discovery. There might be depositions, and then you would go to trial. If you can't resolve within the court system, then you would get a trial date. It might take a year or two, depending on the backlog of the jurisdiction. So just be prepared that it's going to be something for the long haul. But if you can't resolve things, you will get a trial date, and you will have a trial with witnesses and evidence and everything.
Okay, so that makes me think when you said 1 to 2 years, that's on the shorter end when we're thinking about high conflict divorce. People often talk about family court being a circus, but I imagine that civil court is not as performative and crazy with like the show. Is it? Do you find like it's there's a lot of drama and screaming and yelling and bullying, or is it not like that?
Well, I'd say there's probably a little bit more decorum, if you want to use that word. Although tempers do flare and people do manage to say cutting things, and it is an adversarial proceeding, bottom line. And I think that the proceedings are somewhat more formal from what I understand in family court. So that again, having a professional attorney would be helpful in a situation like that. Just for example, if you have a hearing on a motion for summary judgment, who presents their evidence first and what are the rules of evidence? I think the rules of evidence are pretty strictly enforced in non-family court, so you have to be aware of those. Those are some things that come to mind.
Okay. Also, what is a risk-benefit analysis? You had mentioned that in our first conversation.
Same as it would be in any business situation, I think. You have to figure out how much the business is worth and how much your share of the business is worth and how much it's going to cost you to litigate the matter, because litigation is not cheap and it has to be worth it. In some situations, being a litigator, I always want to see the truth prevail and my client get what they deserve. But in some situations, maybe walking away is an option if it's a very small amount of money and your litigation attorney is going to cost you a lot of money. I think that's what I meant by risk-benefit analysis.
Okay. What about in terms of 50-50, what is a request for an accounting? What does that mean?
That is not only for a 50-50 situation, but in any partnership, minority shareholder, majority shareholder, 50-50 shareholder can request an accounting from the corporation or LLC, and access to the books has to be granted during reasonable business hours or whatever the language is. But in principle, you have to have access to the books if you request it. And again, if you do end up in litigation, that is a separate cause of action or claim. A request for an accounting can be part of your complaint in whatever legal proceeding you're filing. It's a type of relief.
Okay, so I'm thinking in family court, this reminds me of discovery requests, like let me see what's actually here. And in family court, abuse of discovery and hiding assets and hiding all kinds of income is very, very common with our types of clients. So what happens if somebody in this situation, like a business situation, wants to see the accounting and it's either hidden or you can't make sense of it? Like, what are consequences of something like that in civil court?
Well, if you file a request for, well, first of all, if you ask during the negotiations process to see the books and you're refused, then you will probably have to seek a legal remedy in court. And it is also part of the discovery process in civil litigation. If you ask to see certain financial records and the other side refuses, you can file what's called the motion to compel discovery. I don't know if family court has that.
Yeah.
And in extreme cases, you can move for sanctions, monetary sanctions, or if the court issues a discovery order that orders the other side to produce business records and the other side does not comply, you can file a motion for civil contempt. So there are remedies. You just have to play it out and slowly escalate.
Okay. So speaking of sanctions and contempt, I know in family court it's very hard to get sanctions. And I also know in my own personal experience and a number of our clients is sometimes the court can find the other person in contempt, but nothing actually happens. There's no enforcement of contempt orders. Is it different in civil court? Like it's a really bad thing and there's actually punishment and penalties to somebody who's found in civil contempt?
Yes, I personally have had sanctions imposed on opposing counsel for not producing discovery, and there was a significant monetary fine penalty imposed on opposing counsel to get him to comply, and I believe he had to pay that out of his personal funds, not out of the client's funds.
Wow.
So yes, there are enforcements available, and from what you're telling me, I think it is more common for someone to be found in contempt of disobeying a court order and sanctions being imposed in state court than it appears to be in family court.
Wow. Okay. Another thing we talked about was the statute of limitations. You said this is really important. So why is that?
Yes, statute of limitations is the time within which you must file a lawsuit. And everybody knows, or it's fairly common knowledge, that in a personal injury lawsuit, the plaintiff has to file against the defendant within a certain amount of time or be barred from filing for their personal injuries regardless of how serious they are. And the same applies in a civil litigation context. Different errors and omissions or theories of liability have different statutes of limitations or times within which lawsuits have to be brought. For a written contract, such as a written partnership agreement, the statute of limitations for written contracts in your state would apply. It might be 4 years, it might be 6 years. If you just have an oral contract, if you never got around to doing a written partnership agreement, the statute of limitations is shorter if you don't have a written agreement. So you have to make sure, don't wait till the divorce is resolved to file your business litigation. You have to file in a timely fashion, even if your divorce is still pending or in the middle of, I don't know, very contentious proceedings. There is no as such right to an extension of that time period just because you're in divorce proceedings.
Wow. Well, that's really good to know, because I know deadlines are a big deal. If you miss the deadline, you're usually stuck no matter what.
Right. There is equitable tolling, but you can't count on that. Sometimes the court uses its discretion and says, okay, we'll let you file late, but there's no right for that.
Yeah. How does somebody find a really good business attorney? Is it dependent on the type of business you have, or is it just like you go looking on Avo? How do you recommend if someone needs someone like you, that they would find someone like you?
Recommendations, your network, word of mouth is still reliable. Then there are online ratings, which are somewhat reliable. Look for, if you find an attorney, look to see what kind of reviews they've gotten online. I think it is wrong to just go with the cheapest attorney. They have to be qualified. And you should also look to see the kind of client base they have. My firm works mostly with smaller businesses. If you have a very large corporation that you own jointly with your spouse, you might consider like a Fortune 500 law firm. If you're a smaller business, you probably wouldn't or I should say AmLaw 200, or we have our own ratings for law firms. But you would probably be able to tell from the website and the social media presence whether the law firm is more geared to smaller businesses. And you also want to look to see if that firm offers sort of one-stop shopping that if you still have agreements that you need to put in place, that they would do that without your having to hire 2 law firms.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so Linda, I don't know if I forgot anything, but we covered a lot, and you're very succinct. So thank you for answering like a whole bunch of questions quickly. That was good.
Well,
is there anything I'm forgetting?
I do remember our covering these topics when we discussed this Instagram Live podcast, and I think that it's one of my better qualities as an attorney that I am succinct, because I think people need clear answers. And I remember in law school, there seemed to be no right or a wrong answer. But then when it came time for the bar exam, all of a sudden there was a right answer and a wrong answer. So I do feel that I have given a lot of technical information in a brief period of time. And I'm sure it's somewhat difficult to absorb all of it. But I think that you should also look for an attorney who is willing to explain things to you and who will keep up the line of communication. I saw this in your book, and I thought to myself, that is so correct. I'm glad. Whoever's reading your book, read the chapter about what to look for in an attorney. I can only second that and say that it is so true.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Linda, how can people find you if they happen to be in Pennsylvania?
My website is company counsel, company COUNSEL.law. We all work remotely, so you can't come to my office as a walk-in. But my email is lalle-murphy@companycounsel.law. And if you forget all that, you can just be in touch with my interviewer.
Yeah, that's
she has
right.
all my contact information. And I am admitted to practice in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That's another thing that I need to stress, that you need to have an attorney that's admitted to practice in your state. It's not like immigration law where it's federal and an immigration attorney can practice essentially nationwide. Most business litigation is specific to a jurisdiction. So make sure you have, well, that brings me to another bit of information. You have to look and see what state your business is incorporated in, and where you would file that lawsuit. That's a whole nother topic. Sometimes it's where most of the transactions took place. Other times are you incorporated in Delaware? Where's your principal place of business? That kind of thing. So make sure your attorney is licensed in your jurisdiction where you would possibly file this business lawsuit.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Linda. And it was really nice meeting you in person. I guess it was a couple months ago. And hopefully we can do this again.
Yes, I do get up to New York occasionally, and you get down from Connecticut. It could be even further. So.
Yes. All right. So take care, and we'll be posting the recording of this really soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Linda.
Bye.
Bye.